Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of SpecTalk. Today's episode is kind of interesting because we are taking the program that we all know and love, SpecLink, and we're going to take a look at it from a different perspective now. So today is SpecLink for owners, and I'm going to call your attention to the part one because there's so much to talk about that we're not going to get through all of it today. So we will talk more about part two later, but you're going to love part one. With you, as always, are your hosts today, me, Dory Azar, a licensed architect and senior strategic sales specialist here at RIB SpecLink, along with Alex Bear, a strategic sales manager here at RIB SpecLink. Good afternoon, Alex. How's it going?
I'm doing great. Doing great. It
Excellent.
is, yeah, it's a great day to be here.
Excellent. Always a good day to be here.
Absolutely.
Today's excellent. Today's summary could go something like this. If you're tired of juggling inconsistent standards and specs across schools, hospitals, warehouses, or even transit systems, this episode is going to flip the script and focus on owners. This time we get to focus on how owners can have full control of their requirements before the architects get involved. If your role is responsible for maintaining building standards for an owner, or you're an architect spec writer who wants to learn how to write how owners think, you're going to really have a lot of great takeaways from today's episode. We'll be discussing why owners need SpecLink, how to build consistency across various regions, which is an interesting one that I'm looking forward to, how to maintain a central living library, which I think might be the backbone of this whole thing, and how to align expectations with all stakeholders. And the person that's going to get through that, that's going to lead us through that, is Glenn Hynes, who's an independent design and spec consultant. Glenn Hynes brings a lot of experience to the show today, from his early days on a drafting board to now championing cloud-based design workflows for design professionals. He's seen a lot in his 30 plus years in the industry. And today, Glenn will be sharing some of that experience with us. He's a design and spec writing consultant who knows how to connect the dots across teams, making sure that the work gets done right the first time, ensuring that there are no redos down the line. He's held multiple roles in design leadership, coached various teams, and continues to push the boundaries of how we design, specify, and collaborate with each other. So buckle up, friends. Glenn is here, and he's brought some serious wisdom to share with us today. So welcome to the show, Glenn.
Thank you very much.
All right, excellent to have you here. So let me stop my screen share here. And before we get started, we are going to start with a poll question today to kind of check the temperature on everybody who's here and see um, what the interest is. So today we're asking, have you ever maintained standards for an owner or an organization? And your answers are yes, I do. No, I don't. I did and I hated it, or I don't. I don't, but I want to. And I think we all have our ideas of what we think the answers are going to be, but I always love to see the experience level coming in today. So it's looking like in the lead, we've got a lot of people who are currently doing it. I will say that all four categories are being answered. There's a couple of people that said I did and I hated it. So I think we've puttered out here, and let's share those results. So yes, I do. Over half of you currently are maintaining standards for an owner or an organization, which is fantastic. No, I don't. I didn't. I hated it. Man, if you're one of those two people that didn't hated it, please leave me some notes in the comments. I would love to hear the backstory on that. And Glenn, we've also got a handful of people here that don't, but they would like to get into that kind of work. So maybe as we move forward today, we will be able to, maybe answer some questions as it relates to what owners are looking for when they are working with or looking for an architect or working with architects. So the first question I'd like to ask you, and we'll start high level here, is what are some of the reasons that an owner would consider using a platform like SpecLink to manage their in-house standards? Because it's not so much specs that they're managing, right? It's we would call them maybe closer to standards than specs. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
where do we draw that line between the two?
Yeah. The biggest thing about it is just, at the owner level, always the biggest thing and the biggest question you have to answer is what is it you're trying to achieve? A lot of times owners, are, it's about saving money. They're wanting to save money, streamline processes, standardize and optimize, other things, along the way. And it really comes down to that. Just again, trying to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. A spec is a spec, but if you as an owner are trying to streamline processes between architects, you have performance standards, you have standardization that you want to follow, and it can vary. I mean, and it's kind of a loose term anyway. So standards is very loose. But again, what is it you're trying to achieve? If you're an owner, and I'm just using examples here, so I don't know who's out there that you may be an owner of one local area or one local place that you're trying to build, or you're a national or a global chain. Are you trying to standardize things that happen out in the field? Are you trying to standardize things that happen in the
Mm.
design side of things, and so on? So again, it's all about your performance, your performance specs. And, when it comes to the design side, is it a challenge, once it moves over into the construction side? Because if you're using multiple architects or multiple design teams to do your work, are your firms in Seattle doing something very different than what your firms are doing down in Miami? And are you wanting to
Mm.
streamline that? Are you partnering with consultants who are willing to, make their drawings look just like somebody else's drawings? Or are you just saying, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Architect, just do whatever you want to do or whatever? But again,
Sure.
the answer really comes down to what is it you're trying to achieve? And then just start working your way backwards. Well, I want to save money, and I feel like standardization is going to do that for me. And standardization, mean again, design side. It's going to help me maybe into the procurement side. It's going to help me as I move over into the construction side. So whatever you're doing, it's got to help that entire chain all the way up, and so on.
And you're suggesting that that could carry from the design phase through to the end of the construction
Oh,
phase.
exactly. Yes, because I mean, again, if you're let's say you're getting into the procurement side of things and you're buying a specific item and you want to make sure that is now across every single one across your designs, you have to be
Mhm.
able to relay that information to your design teams, to the procurement side, onto construction, and so on. Well, how are you doing it now? Are you just is it word of mouth? Do you have a documented process to it? Are there cut sheets that have to follow it? Are there the design guidelines that have to follow that as well? So
Right.
that information has to move. And are you, as the owner, going to organize that and stay that? Or is somebody going to kind of do that for you? Whether you're doing it or somebody's doing it for you, it has to still be done somewhere.
Right. So whether it's some antiquated Word document off to the side somewhere saved on
Yep.
somebody's desktop or something more sophisticated like SpecLink, what
Correct.
you're saying
Yeah.
is it's up to you how you want to organize this information, but it's got
Hmm.
to be organized. And at some point,
Yep.
the less organized it is, the more you're going to
Yep.
pay for it down the line because eventually these things are going to, the issues are,
Yeah.
the contradictions are going to butt heads and they're going to surface.
I mean, it happens. I mean, in the past, when people have come to me to say, "Hey, we need to start organizing and bringing our stuff together to be more centralized," there's times where I was given 150, 200 documents to say, "Can you somehow turn that into one or two," and so on.
Yeah.
So again, do you want to continue working with these multiple documents, or do you want a centralized location where everything can kind of be housed, maintained, updated,
Right.
and so on? But yeah, it's really about identifying what you're trying to achieve, and so on.
So, Alex, why don't you open up SpecLink while we're
Sure.
chatting about it? Maybe we can start to show some things. But while you're doing that, I'd like to ask Glenn from so you've worked on, let's say, both sides of the owner's fence. So you've
Hmm.
obviously worked independently and you've worked for owners. What
Yeah.
what is the challenge of representing an owner from the design side? Or is it way better than we think it is? Are there challenges that we're not aware of? And I know the chuckle that's coming in there.
Yeah.
But how would you describe viewing a project on behalf of an owner versus how maybe a typical or a more traditional role of an architect or spec writer would view a project?
Yeah. So when I was working in the design side, I'm very much that. My feet are on the floor. I'm out on the construction site, and all of that. And I'm thinking and working like a designer. I work for the
Mhm.
company that I'm designing for, and I want to be efficient and cost effective and, whatever, and make as much money as I can for that company as well on the design side. Where it became a challenge, I'll even admit for me at times, was when you do move over to that owner side and I crossed that line. Well, guess what? Now I'm kind of the opposite. Now I'm going back to all of my friends and buddies to say, hey, we're doing it this way, and you're going to have to slash your fees. And that was one of
Ooh,
my biggest challenges
that's a good way to lose
was to
friends.
yeah, was to kind of go back to them and go, look, we're streamlining processes, and we need to go faster, and we want to be able to document everything. And meaning, unfortunately, we're going to be in control. We're going to control what
Hmm.
is being done. Now, control is it's again it's another kind of a loose term because at, I, as working at the owner, we took control, but it doesn't mean that an owner can work with their architect and say you take control. If you, as an owner, like you said, you have multiple design teams across the board, you're going to now rely on that architect or who's ever representing
Hmm.
you on the design side to now standardize, represent everything at the owner level. And they're the ones who basically kind of have to stand and go toe to toe with another design team who may be trying to push back, and so on.
Yeah.
So, long
And
story short, the challenge was now going back to all my friends to say, hey, uh, I'm now on the whatever you maybe want to call it the dark side, but we're now here to streamline, make things go faster because, yes, we now want to start saving money on the design side. Yeah.
And
That was
and you
probably,
know all
hey,
their
Glenn,
excuses and secrets, right? So you get to
yeah.
poke holes in all of your
So,
friends.
yeah,
Glenn, we can't do it for
uh,
another month. Yes, you can.
yeah,
I know
yeah,
you can.
yeah.
now, Glenn, are you
So,
typically working with like a prototype architect, one, or
uh,
is it more so in-house design or collaboration?
it's various, because I
Okay.
mean, an owner is, like you said, it's a loose term. An owner could just be, somebody who runs a, local gas station chain, in town. Again,
Sure.
versus somebody who's very global and prototypical, your fast food chains, those types of things. Yeah, those are a lot of prototypical things, but prototype
Right.
means you don't necessarily have everybody could have a different final product. You got the fast food chain versus, some big, logistics company, or
Sure.
whatever, but they're two different products. But everybody who's probably sitting in this meeting, we're all not doing very much different. We do things very much the same. We're very consistent across the board. Whether I write a spec or I follow the CSI format or I'm doing something, it's the same as everybody else is doing. We're just doing it for a different product in the end. Like you said, maybe
Sure.
it's a fast food chain, maybe it's a gas station, maybe it's somebody who specializes. They are just in apartment complexes or retirement centers. A retirement center is very different than a fast food chain, but the concepts are still the same. Like we're still all doing the same identical thing. So
Right, right.
So,
Now, would you say that from your perspective on the owner side, that typically you see, an annual review of the specifications, maybe a
yeah.
biannual review of the specifications? What would be the sort of the tempo for?
Uh, yeah, it varies kind of depending on what the company is trying to achieve. If you're a company
Uh-huh.
who's going through and you're really trying to save a lot on the procurement side, you're trying to buy things. The economy is very different these days.
Sure.
Especially right now, people may be really trying to stockpile. They may be trying to, like I said, they may be trying to procure a lot of things up front. And so any of those
Right.
new procurement items are probably going to go in there pretty quickly. Again,
Okay.
if you're somebody who streamlined, your designs pretty well, yeah, you're probably going back and re-looking at it maybe once, twice a year, maybe versus, maybe quarterly, what maybe some others, are and so on. Again, just kind of
Sure.
depends on, but it's definitely you need to review. Specs change, new processes are out there, new materials, new construction supply, various things happen, and they do need to be updated regularly.
I'd love
Okay.
to ask the
Okay.
audience right now too, if the audience would drop me a note in the comments and let me know how often, if you are managing standards on behalf of an owner, let me know how often you're revisiting your standards and your specs, and how often, you don't have
Mhm.
to mention who it's for, but just curious to know, to build off of what Glenn just said, how what the consensus is out there of how frequent people are updating their standards. And so what do you got on screen for us here, Alex?
Yeah, so we were just kind of taking a look at some of the, upfront documents. I think, it's always important to sort of re-note to the viewers that we've got a lot of powerful commenting features that are built inside of SpecLink that do help for that review process. So if you are, say, a prototype architect or one of the main, people at the in-house design for an owner, and you're looking to revamp your design standards, maybe once a year, twice a year, whatever that may be, these commenting tools that you can kind of hover over a paragraph, you can review things within the actual office master. You can add comments, you can assign comments to particular people, kind of a thing. And so it gives that dialogue to have everybody's eyes on the prize as far as the design standards. The commenting, you can send that to a particular person. They'll have the ability to come back in. They can, review that. They'll get a notification. They can reply, but it keeps everybody kind of on the same sheet of music. And then when those things are sort of resolved, you can mark that as resolved, and it will remove that from the punch list. But the system is very much, oriented around having everybody, who does need to review the design standards and specifications, doing so in a central way.
Excellent. We're getting some answers in here from viewers who are letting me know how often their standards are being updated. And we've got formally each month. I like that answer. Like that's a real high commitment there. Yearly, we got an annual one. We've got annual or per project. That's an interesting one. I wonder what would have to happen on one project to stop the process and say, okay, we need to update our standards now because of what happened on this project. Quarterly, we're getting quarterly here. We got another one here. This one's a little bit longer, but we're getting a sense of, I think it's people adjusting to whatever works for them, Glenn. Maybe there's no answer. Maybe it's just knowing your process, knowing your company.
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alex.
And one of the things we kind of advertise this webinar is to discuss, the challenges of inconsistent specs. So, SpecLink, it does place all of your specifications in a neutral online environment, and it gives you the ability to dictate, what the core components are, especially if you do go the guide specification route as opposed to maybe having a manual design standards. You can also choose, your formatting. So I know that's another piece that can go a bit bonkers when you've got 12 different architects and engineers that are working on a large hospital system or a large school project. So you're able to control what is this format, what is it going to look like, what are the headers and footers. You can also pre-embed particular edits. So this is an edit by selection system, which affords all kinds of different benefits, but from the owner side, you do have that ability to kind of pre-select those traditional design standards, the things that you typically use, and then you have that ability within the system to take that particular master and maybe more of a copy of the master. You can kind of box out people to have only a finite group to actually manage your masters, but you can take that master and you can share it with those project architects and engineers. So again, they're going to get that same project. Everybody's going to be on the same page. They can't necessarily take their own specifications, but rather they're enforced to use the ones that are provided, and that gives a great foundation, and it preliminarily reduces a lot of RFIs and change orders because you aren't having to enforce your standards where you're reviewing their specifications, making sure that they've incorporated your design standards. You're able to kind of fold it all into one and then oversee, through track changes, different changes to the specifications. You can review those, you can accept those, you can reject those. So again, it's just bringing everybody onto the same sheet of music. And I think, Glenn, when we were talking a bit previously, I think it was interesting to hear your story about how you've worked with owners in the past, and how you've had architects and engineers that are would use SpecLink, and that process would go very, very seamless. And when that went seamless, there was a lot of time and cost savings and reduction of hiccups in the process, versus architects and engineers that had a little bit more negotiations with you around the
Hmm.
specifications, and those
Yeah.
sometimes weren't as successful. Would you be able to share that sort of that story with the group by chance?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to touch base on, again, my preference of why I prefer SpecLink, versus,
Okay.
something else. This is not, when we're doing standardization, in the industry for anything, there's no right or wrong way. Like, as long as you're finding an efficient way, something that works for you as a company or you work as a team, and so on. So you can, I'm not saying you can't, you can take your specs and just write them in Word if you want to. You can use other applications, and so on. And again, it's not that it's right or wrong, but you have to begin to think about think about that editing you were just talking about. Well, I got to edit my specs, once a month, or I'm doing that quarterly. Okay, well, how are you doing that? And then how are you distributing, that information as well? I worked with people who, they used SpecLink. I worked with people who were, on the fence about SpecLink and they used something else. And I used people who had specs that they had just floating around on their desktop for the past 25 years, and they would just re-edit that, every single project, and so on. But why I chose SpecLink, and the biggest thing is because it was a centralized cloud opportunity for me to link to it and so on, and be able to share, easily update, and so on. But one of the other things that I really gravitated more, I want to say more, but I leveraged greatly in SpecLink is the ability to customize your spec to your process, to your final product, and so on. So, and again, that's just, my feelings about SpecLink is, when I'm in Word, Word is just Word. It's just words on a screen. It's no different than a fancy drafting board, and so on. But I need the intelligence. I need that linking. I need to be able to go to a product. I need to be able to share it easily with another architect or a client. I can share my project with somebody, but I can also build the spec to suit my needs. So let's say you have one of your group members, whatever that role position is, maybe they're the person who's kicking off the performance spec for that company. And
Okay.
what I've done in the past was I was able to build, or you can build your spec link to be extremely intelligent. So we'll use that Seattle to Miami scenario that I brought up earlier.
Sure.
So if you are a company as an owner, you have standards across the board. You're going to have some that do have to match in Seattle, and there are some that are going to have to be, and they're going to match with what you're doing in Seattle. And then we'll introduce a third city like Phoenix, for example. So if I'm sitting down and I'm doing my spec, and I have performance specs that go across all of my products, my final product, you develop that into your spec. But you can also develop that spec into something that makes it area specific, city specific, product specific. So, for example, you can build your spec in SpecLink to sit down. I'm going to say, I'm starting my project, and this is going to be a Seattle project. There's things in Seattle that we do that we just don't do in Phoenix, or something, something you maybe do very different in Miami. So you can build your spec to say, okay, I'm in Seattle. The spec is going to analyze itself, how he was just showing where you can turn things off and on, off and on. You can pre-build all that. So let the software do the work for you. So if it goes, okay, Alex is in Seattle, he's doing this spec. He's in Seattle. I know that because he told me it's in Seattle. It's going to start analyzing and turning things off and on for you because it's in Seattle. Next time Alex does a project and he's copying over from his office master, this time he's going to be doing it in Phoenix. Well, Phoenix is a very different climate. Maybe there's a lot of hot weather types of information.
Sure.
Maybe there's a solar opportunity that needs to be introduced.
Right.
But
Right.
he can do that by just saying, "Nope, now I'm in Phoenix," and now that the spec is going to analyze and turn itself off and on to say, "Oh, now Alex is in Phoenix." So that was one of the other things that I wanted to leverage, was not just words on a screen or linking. I needed intelligence. So that way, when I sit down, and again, somebody is writing that spec for them, whether it's being done at the owner level or it's being done at that architect level, they're building it faster. Let the software do the work. Like I said, don't sit there
Sure.
and have to click every single line because, oh, now I'm in Phoenix versus Seattle or versus Miami. The application can and will do that. It does take some
Sure.
work up front to make that very possible. So that's one of the reasons why I leverage and I work towards SpecLink, because of the intelligence of what it is that I'm trying to do. I'm not saying
Okay.
you have to use that linking, that powerful linking, because maybe your final product doesn't allow that or doesn't need it. You can
Right.
pre-build to use your own specs, and so on.
Sure.
So,
And you could, and
so
I would imagine that could be the same for facility types or, from the
anything, yeah.
owner's
Like I said,
perspective.
the goal really is think about your final product that you have. Again, let's say you have a healthcare versus you are a developer who you just do nothing but apartment complexes across the country, and that a healthcare building is very different than what you're going to be doing, inside your facility for an apartment complex. So think about your final product, and so on. But
Right.
you could be an owner who does have multiple products. I've worked with some owners that are like that. Maybe you work with an owner that you have a certain amount of square footage, and whatever happens between this square footage, you have to have this, and this. But if you
Okay.
cross this square footage line, you now need this, and that, kind of thing, and so on.
Interesting.
It all depends on your final product. What is your final product? What do you do? Is it the same? Is it a cookie cutter prototype thing across the country, or do you do something different in one part of the country than you do different in another part of the country? But the base
Sure.
is the same. If 80% of your product is the same, you can build the spec. If 20% is different, you can still build your spec to let SpecLink adjust and work that last 20% for you.
Okay. So
Oh,
yeah, so maybe 80, a little bit of 80/20 rule with,
Yeah.
the abilities to sort of pre-frame the specification, and then use the, flexibility and the collaboration tools to fill in those
Yeah.
gaps with your project
Yes.
architects and
Yeah.
engineers. And SpecLink is, it's especially now that we're on the cloud, it's all about that level of
Yeah.
collaboration.
Yeah.
So we appreciate the feedback from your side for
mhm.
sure.
We got a couple of questions that have come in that are kind of related. So I'm hoping we can demonstrate or provide some answers for Tammy and Peter here. So Tammy's asking, how can I find out how to pre-build this checklist that you're talking about? And I'm going to
Mhm.
share with Tammy some links to some previous spec talks where we really did deep dives on linking and how to do that. And then Peter's asking if you can show an example of linking a section to a region in another section, which
Sure.
activates. So do you have any cross-section activation you can demonstrate for us, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just play off of Glenn's scenario. Let's say that the project's in Phoenix, and what would be a good section that may impact? I'm wondering if there's something around heat or
Yeah, solar, solar, because, if
solar.
you're doing something,
Sure.
in Phoenix, you're probably going to be utilizing solar.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's just go ahead. What we're going to do then, we'll come in and we'll use the sequence manager tab on the left, and I'm going to come over to the links, and I'm going to add a link. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so when I turn on Phoenix, and I'm going to make this what's called a cross section link as opposed to a paragraph link. So I'm going to come in here to my table of contents, and let's say that we want to have this 235613 heating solar flat plate collector section turn on. I'm going to come over here and choose that. Okay, and then I can make that basically turn on. So when I turn on Phoenix, it's going to turn on this section. And maybe I even want it to turn on some of these unique components below, as far as,
Hmm.
maybe I know I'm going to need solar collectors, and I'm going to need controls, and I'm going to need, I'm just kind of making some things up here, valves. Okay, so I can go ahead and save that as a cross section link. Okay, so now what happens is I'm going to go ahead and let that sort of lock and load.
It's doing its thinking.
Doing its thinking. Okay, and you can see now that it automatically brought those items in. So by me just making those quick few edits, which is, it's not any sort of, crazy software engineering degree required here with SpecLink. I've set up that preliminary linking. So again, I turn that on. It's going to turn on that section or those paragraphs. And you can even do, if there's a one level further, you can even do with choices. So you can make it to where, when you choose a particular, location or facility type, maybe it impacts, certain finishes or, MPI or pay with paints or what have you. You can have that impact a choice to go kind of even one step further.
Yeah, and everything he's demoing can like I said, what he said done by choices, just like that. So if you came through there and you had your cities just underneath there, you do everything in, let's say you're on the West Coast, you do everything in whatever, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, and Phoenix, and you have something different. You can set that up so when you select your city, it'll automatically do everything that he just did. It'll analyze the product, the application for you. It does take some work, you have to, like I said, it doesn't take you to do any computer programming. You just got to understand linking very, very well inside SpecLink, and that's how you build it out.
We're gonna challenge Alex a little bit more here. We're gonna put you right on the spot, Alex, with everybody
All right.
watching. Peter, who asked the original question, is asking a follow-up question. He says, one layer deeper, can you treat reference standards the same way? Example, product X trips ASTM blank to activate.
Absolutely. Yep, you can. So within part 2, as you're choosing your materials, we've actually placed the product or the reference standards adjacent to them. So what happens is those are actually pre-defined or linked within SpecLink. Now, if you import your own sections, you can add this linking as well. But so if I turn on this paragraph 76, okay, for ASTM C119, then we can see above where it automatically brings that to life. So that sort of information is going to kind of domino through via the linking.
But you can actually, same thing with products. I just use location as an example. But products, you choose a product and you want it to update something differently, you can do that as well. Yeah,
right.
The linking is extremely powerful.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I think once people understand the limits or lack of limits, I should say, of what the linking can do. And we've had some previous guests on that talk about real advanced linking opportunities. One scenario that came up recently was using it for lead projects, and the viewer was giving us some examples of hours that they save they do a lot of lead projects, so they kind of pre-built their template to accommodate that, and it's dozens of hours per project that they're saving. I'd like to also add in the chat that everybody should have access to, Gary Christensen, our good man, sent me some links about creating section checklinks. Let me start over. Creating section checklists in SpecLink and creating project checklists in SpecLink. I've posted those links in the chat, so if anybody wanted another deep dive or a deeper dive into those with some excellent step-by-step instruction, you can check those out.
Yeah, and I'll plug Gary since now he's on here. Good resource. If you guys really want to know, reach out to Gary. Yeah, Gary and I go way back. I've talked to him a lot about stuff. So glad to see Gary's on.
Well, let's pick on Gary then. Yeah, this is great.
Well, he may be joining. I'm trying to recruit him for the next SpecTalk. Let's choose our words.
Let's just peer pressure him live while everybody's watching. All right, I'm just reading through a few more questions here, guys. So yeah, so I think that is a thing. Once people understand that when you can click one button and have it do so much related and relevant thinking for you. And I know we had chatted about this before, Glenn. I also want to remind everybody that the level of accuracy that comes with that. So you can really focus on these things and carefully write them once and know that the next time you click that button, you're activating content that you've scrutinized to the nth degree to make sure that it's exactly what you want it to be every single time, right? So Yeah, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, because it goes back to what I was saying. Use that example of the one that's sitting on somebody's desktop, that they've used for 25 years or whatever.
Hmm.
It's a really good example because y- we've all done it. I mean, I've done it. We've all done it before, where you just like, oh, this project is very similar to the last one, so I'm just going to open up and do a file save as.
Sure.
Nothing is some. I mean, there's similarities, but nothing is the same. And I've been on that end where we had a spec writer who just did that. They just did a file save as, changed some things, and they did not update every single thing that it should have been in there because it was this tedious manual. They have to read every line, kind of process, and it came back to haunt us. Whether it was they forgot to change the product number, a color, whatever, various things or whatever, but because we're utilizing SpecLink and you're thinking deeply about that linking, you're thinking about your processes and all of that, then yeah, you'll go through this through a very, very detailed. But again, think about like what do I have to change 80% of the time? Can SpecLink just do that for me? Sure,
Hmm.
or like it can do a lot of that work up for you, and then you just focus on what is now very project specific. You know, yeah, it can. I mean, it can. That's the joy of this. It just saves you hours of work. Now it's a lot of, I'll admit it's probably, there is some work up front in order to build it out, but
Hmm.
boy, in the long run, it definitely pays for itself by
But
that link.
everything you do in this
Well,
industry is a lot of work.
Everything
Prepping
is
whatever
up
you're
front.
using for
Yes.
your drafting software is so
Yep.
much front end work to get it to look like how
Exactly.
you want it to look, so that it
Yep.
saves you all that time. We've got
100%.
a question from Devin coming in that is gonna Alex. We're just gonna test you today. Just we're gonna like how long you been with RIB? 1,000 years,
bring
something
it.
like that. We're gonna test
Since
every bit
2006,
of it.
20-year anniversary is
um,
coming up.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable. That's amazing. So it's kind of two parts here. So the first question was, is there the ability to link documents from the documents library? So I asked for a little more clarification and got it. And what he's asking is it's a kind of a longer reply here. So, but I'll jump to it. It says, for example, if the spec section or paragraph is turned on, it will automatically include the assigned document from the document library. Look at those wheels
So
spinning.
you can take a from our document library, you can take, for instance, like if I've got some sort of an FF&E document that I want to apply adjacent to my, let's say, I guess that'd probably be something in Division 11 or Division 12. But I can take a document. So this is the document. Let me kind of back up here. This is the document library in SpecLink. It's an area that you can upload different PDF files that you'd like to associate to certain project specs. So I can come into SpecLink and I can come to a particular section and I can actually attach a document. So let's say that I've got sorry, this is a tile, but let me make sure it's real life stuff. Okay, so yeah, I can take that, attach the document.
And
Okay, and
I
then
am under. So I'm reading now on my in my chat here that the um not everybody has access to the document library at the moment.
okay,
So
so yeah,
No.
that is a request upon kind of demand feature, but we can add that to your SpecLink program.
okay, so just if you're watching and trying to follow along and don't see that feature, that's not in everybody's hands yet. So
And
Sure,
to
sure.
give you an example of how I use that was, we'll go back to the type of product. So if you are an owner or there's a specific product that you procured, and so on that you want everybody to use, whether it's regional or it's across the board, and you have all of the cut sheets, you have everything that go with that particular product, you can put those inside your document area there. And when they do activate that, so let's say you use three different types of products that are the same, three different types of doors or whatever, and each have their own specific cut sheet or anything that follows with that or whatever, if they choose that one particular item, it'll turn all of those on, and so on. So it's a pretty handy deal, especially if you have specific performance type specs that you need and so on.
Sure.
Speaking of that, what a segue, Glenn. We've got another question that's come in from Ryan, and this, both of you, I'm putting you on the spot now. Is how do you see SpecLink fitting into value engineering? Have you ever had an experience where you had maybe that baked into SpecLink to consider
Yeah.
value engineering?
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of depends on what's being VE'd out, and so on. But very similar of how you can turn things off, you can also quickly turn things on. You can then kind of quickly turn things off, and so on. So if something is being VE'd out and you now no longer need it, it does a pretty good job of just kind of reblasting everything, thing the opposite way, and so on. But one of the other things that, and again, this is probably made back to the RIB guys, is that there's always been talk about building and connecting the specs to BIM software. I know that has that ability, but how has that progressed? Where if you're doing things in Revit, is it updating and advancing your specs, and so on? And maybe not. Maybe that's still something we've always been talking about, and so on. But
Sure. Well, we do. I mean, we have BIM integration built in. I'd say it's still probably version 1 or version 2. There's definitely room for growth, especially when it comes to things like material schedules. But yeah, the system, it does have the ability to upload a particular Revit file. And then it
hmm
has some high level sort of AI that, allows you to kind of break down your model by,
yeah,
particular areas, and it kind of reads different components and starts to suggest things that you can kind of turn on, turn off.
hmm
Um, And then you can also make decisions on what part of the spec you want to include. Of course, this is all going to be based on sort of consistent information. So it has to be that sort of level of, consistency and, integrity in the model or the objects. If you take something and sort of just edit it and modify, it's kind of like SpecLink. I mean, same concept with the specifications.
hmm
The idea is to build a framework that makes things consistent and cost effective. So, just like you can create an office master or a guide spec, you can create your object library. But again, you want to make sure that it is consistent. And when it is consistent, the point being here is that then our system will read and review that information, in which case you can turn on those associations, but you can also lock them in as sort of a permanent associated arrangement between that object and that spec. And it gives that sort of learned memory that helps to bring together, your table of contents or some high level choices for the specification.
So Dory, I see a question or a comment in there that I would like to add if possible, or
Please, yeah.
address. I saw the one from Devin. He said, like
Mhm.
to use the document library to store all masters. This will approach to prevent the staff from copying outdated, and that's true. I mean, kind of becomes your your library, your source. So this is where you're now storing everything. Again, if you have stuff that you are procuring, it doesn't matter. Again, I just keep using that as an example. But if you do have standards that you do not want people to just keep replicating or have floating around on your desktop, it becomes your source. You can store, like again, not everything, but if you have something you're using over and over and over again, you can save that in your document management. And then so when a new update comes, you're just updating that one. And then the next time a new project gets started, it automatically comes over with that project. Again, it kind of becomes your one central one-stop shopping for anything and everything specs, whether you're linking it, whether you're tying it to a document, whatever. It kind of becomes your single source of truth. So again, you're not dealing with the 120 or 100, 200 documents floating around out there. You now have it centralized. But yeah, that's exactly how I started building and everything out.
All right.
Sure.
There's
And
another
at the same
interesting.
time, you can
Oh,
make things unselectable. So you can make them,
Yep.
non-selectable. So if it's something that you just do not want them to be able to remove, you can do that too. So
Yeah.
There is a question that I just lost it off my screen here, but if you give me 1 second, I will find it again because it was a good one. Peter is asking for Glenn's specific advice on this. So, regarding creating a master, if we have an antiquated master in SpecLink from the master spec days, needs about 10,000 updates. What is a time efficient strategy that Glenn might recommend to bring
Yeah.
that old set of sections back from the dead?
Yeah.
Glenn,
So it's a good.
10,000 updates.
Yeah, good question. So the answer is you can still bring, so if you have a lot of things, there, whether it's like an old Word document or whatever, that you do now want to start bring in incorporating and I mean, the goal is like you're trying to utilize SpecLink content as clearly as much as possible, but maybe it's not always the case. Maybe, yeah, you do have an old performance spec, you do have something that you have floating out there. But if you have those Word documents or you have those files, they're very easy to bring in and import. Um, but it does take some editing, and once you kind of bring it in, at least you don't have to retype it word for word for word all over again. You can import, you can bring it in, but again, it kind of starts as like a basic document where you do have to kind of go back through and do some editing. I've done the same thing where people have given me just a pile of old specs, and so on, and they want to incorporate that because it's their performance spec or it's their whatever. You can upload, you can begin the process, but it does take some also re-editing back in there. That does have the typical search and find. You can kind of do normal kinds of things. So uploading is a lot easier. Bringing them in is pretty quick and simple, but then you do kind of have to go back into some editing mode, which leads to probably some of the biggest questions is, AI. When is, SpecLink and RIB going to try to incorporate some AI opportunities, and so on. But again, that's a whole other question.
We'll save that for another webinar, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I'm loving the questions today, guys. So we've got another value engineering question, Glenn, if you're if you're up for it.
Sure.
The question is, does SpecLink have a function to archive specs at selected benchmarks? Example, at the end of CDs, bidding prior to contract VE exercises, CA changes. Can we archive specs at benchmarks?
I don't, that's probably a question back to you guys is, what are some of the newer features or features you guys have built that allow us to now to do that and archive some of these things. A lot of times, you can archive the old traditional way, the PDF way. We've done that, but is there a more advanced now opportunity where it actually archives a spec, the actual master spec file? Or the
That's
spec
Alex. What do
link
you
or
know about that?
the master.
Well, you can archive. Yeah, there is a way to archive the
Yeah,
file. I don't think that's quite if this is the nature of the question.
yeah.
Let me pull the question back up to make sure we got
You can
the
archive a
wording right here.
project. You can save it out. You have the opportunity to archive it.
So does SpecLink have a function to archive specs at selected benchmarks? So I wish we could turn Peter's microphone on. It sounds like, yeah, at a certain point they want a sort of snapshot of that spec and
Yeah,
then build off that. The same way if you had you save your design drawings at a certain phase, save
yeah,
as, bury
yeah.
it somewhere and keep working with the same
Similar
version.
process. Yeah, yeah. So like if you have same thing with your Revit files, like if you guys are doing anything in Revit, finding your AutoCAD files or whatever your design authoring software applications are, you save out a version of that. Here I am at 50% CDs, and we don't touch anything, inside that Revit model.
Right.
Same kind of process and concept. So,
Right.
yes, yeah.
So at
Just
that
like that.
point, Glenn, what would your best practice be then? Would you archive it as a PDF to make sure that it's frozen and nobody can go back
Yes,
in there and tinker with it?
yeah, yeah. I'm more because the authoring applications can still be altered, and so on. So I rely heavily more on my PDF documents, where those things that are set in milestone, that are set in stone, that capture in time, that whatever you want to call it. So even like my design applications and so on, when I get to a 50% CD set in my Revit models, or
Mhm.
whatever,
Yep.
I'm not necessarily saving out a whole other Revit model at CD set. I'm saving the PDF file, and so on. Again, not saying that you can or can't, but if you do that for every single project, you're clogging your system with these extra
Mhm.
files that you don't necessarily need, because Revit files or any kind of digital files like that can be extremely large. So we rely heavily on the PDFs. Same thing with my specs. I don't necessarily archive a project during milestones. I'm not saying that you can or cannot. I rely heavily on the PDF milestone that I go back to
Mhm.
if I
Yeah,
need
because
to.
I think that would be the point of the benchmark, right? Is where were we in that time? The file size is going to be, especially when you're talking Revit files or BIM files, right? To
Yeah.
save a PDF is going to be a lot better. But yeah, the point would be to have that snapshot, not to go back and be able to edit anything. And you just never know. Somebody's getting into an old file, click something by accident, and then
Yeah.
that archive is out of sync.
And I see the comment from Eric about Gary talked about that saving version in his spec talk. So again,
Hmm.
you have the ability to do that. I think it's just up to you as a customer. Like, do you want to do that? Do you want to save it out as your benchmark sets as a true
Hmm.
spec file, or do you just want to save it out as a PDF file? I
Yeah.
personally don't save them as my authoring milestones, only at my PDF format. So
All right. So there's Glenn's best practice.
Glenn, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever, in your experience with SpecLink, opened up the doors of the collaboration features to your facilities folks as they're maybe, identifying products that are or are not working to be able to use the commenting features?
no, because facilities guys are not spec writers. They're not,
Okay.
you start introducing them to like, hey, we need you for you to come in here and click list. They're going to be like, nah, that's not
Okay.
I've got a couple of things here, and I know we're down to less than 10 minutes left. And there's one big question I wanted to get to, but first, we had a question or a statement come in, I should say, about archiving your specs, and the comment was
Mhm.
you could make a copy of the project and rename it
Yeah,
the milestone name and lock for editing, then
you can't.
continue
Yeah,
editing the original or next milestone. So there's another option
yeah,
that you could have to consider. Glenn, one thing that I sort of promoted that we might talk about today, and I'd love your 2 minute take on it, is what is an owner looking for out of an architect and spec writer when if you're working for an owner and you're managing standards and
hmm
prototypes, but you're looking to hand that off to regional architects or spec writers to you know continue the process. What are owners looking for in that in those design professionals
yeah.
to trust with their work? Are they looking? Do they have to be using certain types of software? Do they have to have certain licensure across multiple states? What are
Yeah.
some of the things they're looking for?
So it all really kind of comes back to, again, what I was saying earlier. It's the sophistication of that owner. You have some owners who they do not ever care about design authoring applications. They don't care about, their specs, meaning they don't want to control that. Meaning, so if they say, look, we just want to use Revit, and they're going to pass that over to, the architect's firm, and so on, they may tell that architect, you standardize it across all board, across everybody. If we're using 12 different architectural firms, we want our product to be done the same way every single time, because our guys are in the field are struggling. If we want all of our documents to be the same. We want our standardizations to be the same. So if I'm working for that company and I'm doing some kind of management for them out in the field, and I'm flying into Phoenix, I want that drawing set to look exactly like I did at my previous site or whatever that I was just at, because you're wasting time. It's a complete waste of time trying to retrain your brain of like, oh, this architect does this differently, their schedules are different, and so on. But again, it just kind of depends on the sophistication of the owner and really what they're trying to achieve. You do have some owners who are very, very diverse in spec writing, design author applications, softwares, and all. They know Revit, they know SpecLink, they
Hmm.
know those types of things. So they may very well control it. So they will tell the architects or tell the teams, like, we want you to do this. We want you to use SpecLink. We want everybody to be the same, because it doesn't make any sense for things to be floating around, because the biggest thing that's big right now is data. Everybody wants data, and they're starting to centralize those single source of truth, Revits, spec links, all that. But if you're still continuing floating around 200 different types of processes or 200 different documents floating out there, it's extremely difficult to capture that data. So
Right.
owners are starting to standardize those things because they're trying to capture data. And again, data is an extremely loose term. But in all fairness, and like you said, this is me talking at the owner level, going back to the architects. The challenge, at the architectural level, which sounds awful, but they'll tell you, like, if you don't want to use Revit or you don't want to use SpecLink, or you don't want to play you don't want to use our rules, we're just
Mhm.
going to go find somebody who will. And
Right.
again, the concepts are not difficult. I've run into firms who just told me, like, yeah, we're not doing that. We're not utilizing SpecLink. We're not utilizing this application or ever. Okay, well, we just moved on to the next firm that would help us streamline and standardize. And our goal with an owner is we want to help the architects as much as we want them to help us. We're 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 not enemies. We're allies. We want to help each other out. So if we can rely on them to help make our lives easier as owners, we want that. That's the goal. We're not here to make architects' life difficult. But anyway,
No, that's great. I've got a comment that just came in from an owner. So the comment is, and if I can mention the owner's name, I will, but I won't right now. It says, as an owner, we create best practice features that get included in our architect specs. And when
hmm
we hire additional architects, we want that same value add or unique spec to be included in the next set of specs too. Reduce the duplication of effort and speed to market with creation and duplication of prior good spec is key. So there's
correct.
some direct from
Yes.
owner
Yep.
feedback and
100%.
commentary.
Yes. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we chose, or why I prefer, or I choose SpecLink more than anything. It centralizes all of your stuff. So the next time, yeah, a new architect comes on board, or you're looking to hire a new firm to come on board, you tell them we use SpecLink, we use Revit, we use these things because,
Mhm.
again, you want that same value add, or like the whole speed to market is a huge term. There is a reason why we want you to use these things because, and again, for the architect, it doesn't matter. I mean, the value is coming back. The owner is trying to establish the value for them. We
Right.
need your input, Mr. and Mrs. Architect. We need it greatly to help us move these things along, but you're impeding what we're doing if you can't use these applications. And again, multiple reasons: speed to market,
Mhm.
data, that value add. I mean, there's a lot
Right.
of key
Right.
words just in that comment right there.
And that
So,
comment came from Chris, and Chris is with Acadia Healthcare. So if
oh, good. Yes.
just from the framework of where he's
hmm
coming from, it's not a
Yeah.
fast food chain. It's a whole
Yes.
a whole other animal,
Healthcare is a very
healthcare.
different animal. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, guys, we are down to 2 minutes left here. Glenn, I'm going to pull up my screen share for some closing slides. But is there any sort of final thoughts you want to share with people on um, things, takeaways that they can have as they move forward?
No, I mean, again, I've said a lot, especially about, the benefits of utilizing SpecLink. If you are an owner, like I said, probably one of the biggest challenges that, as I did, I ran into as an owner was, you know, if you as an owner don't care about your standards and you just want to pass it off to the architect, let them do it. Like, let them drive it for you. Let them stand toe to toe with the other teams who do not want to play the game, as an owner. But again, those owners who are controlling it, this is the comments to the architects. It's like they're controlling it for a reason. They're not here to, we're not here to, make things miserable for you. It's just this is the
Right.
standard we want because there's a whole behind the green curtain process that's happening that you just don't ever know. You don't need to know because they're collecting data, they're doing these other things, they're doing it for operations, and so on. So again, it's really about just working together. And
Mhm.
like I said, owner, if you need an architect, rely on them heavily. They know what they're doing. But an
Right.
architect, if you have an owner who does know the game, the Revits, the SpecLink, let them work with you. Like you need let them, like I said, work with them on it, what they're trying to do. You can help them greatly.
Oh, that's excellent closing thoughts. If anybody wants to reach out to Glenn for any of the things that he shared with us today or more, Glenn's available by email, as you can see on screen here. Glenn A. Hynes at outlook.com, I believe is the best way to reach you there, Glenn.
Yep.
And our next Spec Talk is, look at this guy. This is going to be a May 14th at noon, same time, same place. We are going to be doing a SpecLink open house. So what that means is we're not going to have any particular topic. We're going to show up. Alex is going to be manning this one by himself. I will be away in a far off land doing things. But you're in good hands with Alex. Alex might even bring a mystery guest on to be with him that day. But right now we're set up to have an open house with Alex. So bring your SpecLink questions, any things that might be giving you trouble. Any closing things that you want to learn or things that could just push you to the next level. Alex is going to be there to answer those questions, demonstrate those things for you, and help you get to where you need to be in your SpecLink journey. So on that note, everyone, I just want to thank everybody again for another excellent episode. Glenn, you were an absolute treat as I read some of the comments coming in, a rock star with a bunch of R's at the end there. So it's I know you brought a lot of value to a lot of people today, and I know they're going to be if anybody wants to watch the replay, it will be available usually by tomorrow. Now, Glenn, somebody's asking here about your LinkedIn profile. I don't think Glenn is active on LinkedIn. No, Glenn, so you got an email address on screen
Just
there.
email me. Yeah, I'll reach out to
That's
you.
the best we can do. Otherwise, guys, always a pleasure to be on. Alex, always a treat. Glenn, great to get to collaborate with you on this one. And mark your calendars, May 14th with Alex, SpecLink Open House. So get your questions ready, and we'll see everybody then. And until then, have an awesome day, guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, Glenn.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks,
Everyone,
Glenn.
take care.
Thanks, Dory.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thanks.